And we're back on the verdict, and Kent Myers is ready to introduce our guest today. Kent?
Well, we're very pleased to have the governor of the state of Oklahoma, the Honorable Brad Henry. Governor Henry is a Shawnee native, grew up there, served in the Oklahoma Senate for 10 years with distinction as head of the Judiciary Committee and other important duties. Is a father of 3 girls, is married to Kim, a school teacher, our First Lady, and has been kind enough to give us time in a very difficult session as well as time in our state to come visit with our viewers on the verdict. And although you've been a frequent visitor before, this is your first time as governor, and we welcome you, Governor Henry.
Well, thank you very much. You're right. I think this is my 5th or 6th appearance on the verdict. You guys are going to have to start paying me some commission or something. Well, I do like the way you underscored my service with distinction.
Yeah. Well, we think that's the way it was generally viewed, certainly by your contemporaries and by the voters.
Well, thank you.
Let's talk about your initial 90 days as governor. What have been your initial impressions? Has the job been different than you expected, harder, easier? How would you characterize it?
You know, of course, I've served in the legislature for the past 10 years and grew up around the legislative process with my cousin Robert Henry in the AG's office, my father in the House. So I've got a pretty good familiarity with the way things work at the Capitol. Not a whole lot surprises me, but I think probably the thing that has been probably the most surprising to me and maybe a little bit frustrating is the fact that I am called on to do so many kinds of ceremonial things, make speeches, do interviews on
the
shows,
verdict,
tape shows like The Verdict, all kinds of media interviews, all of which are great and wonderful. It's a part of the job, but I feel sometimes as though I'm just the public spokesperson. You know, I'm the person that likes to roll up the sleeves and get down in the trenches and find solutions and fix the problems. And I've done a lot of that, but some of these other things pull me away from the real problem-solving aspect of the office. So I find myself working a lot of late nights and early mornings. Fortunately, I've got lots of energy and require little sleep.
Well, you have always, in the last 10 years in your Senate service, worked within the legislative branch. Now you're in the executive branch, needing to work with the legislative branch. Right. How has that relationship been for you?
It's amazing how my perspective has changed on the legislature in a very short period of time. You know, a bit like babysitting a bunch of school kids, but no, I shouldn't say that. I work very well with the legislative branch because I think because I know most of them, and I was elected out of the Senate. But it is different. You know, I have different responsibilities now, and most everyone looks to me if things don't go well, if the Democrats and the Republicans are bickering in the House and Senate, and we aren't getting things done. I think people really look to the governor for leadership. So, you know, I've tried to step up, and I've preached a bipartisan message since the day I was elected. And frankly, I think it's working. For the first time, at least in the 11 years that I've been around the Capitol, Republicans are at the table as we discuss these very difficult issues surrounding the fiscal crisis, the budget crunch that we're under. Their ideas are on the table. They're being discussed. They're in the decision-making loop, and I think they all appreciate it. I think Democrats and Republicans alike are going to be better off if we all work together.
Let me ask you one final question on this. In your State of the State address, I think it was, you mentioned that you felt as though you weren't supposed to be here, meaning being governor. Do you still feel that way, or do you sometimes really not only think you're not supposed to, but wish you weren't?
Well, I don't know if it's so much that I felt I wasn't supposed to be here. I think that's kind of was the general attitude. Nobody really expected me to win this race for governor. And the amazing thing is I look back on the year-long campaign, some of the ups and downs of the campaign. I always believed that I would win this race. And in retrospect, I sometimes wonder what the heck I was thinking. But you know, I believed in myself. Now, a lot of people didn't think I would win, and in some minds I wasn't supposed to be here. But my point is I'm here. And the real point is we can do anything we want if we just believe. And that goes not just for me and my personal career, but that goes for Oklahoma. We have all the assets. We have the intellectual capacity. If we'll just work together to move Oklahoma forward, we can get these things done, and we can do anything that we need to do. You know, I'm not supposed to be here has worn off a bit. I think people now realize that I'm serious, and I've got good proposals, and I'm going to work hard, and I understand how to get it done, and I'm up to the task.
Governor, geographically, the war in Iraq is a long ways away from Oklahoma, but I'm sure there are repercussions here in the state that you're having to deal with. I'm interested, what are the issues of the war with Iraq, and how is it affecting Oklahoma and your role as governor?
Well, obviously, there is a tremendous impact on Oklahoma and every state in the nation. I mean, first of all, the war with Iraq affects our economy. And depending on how this war goes, I mean, nobody knows for sure, but the goal and the idea is for this war to be short and decisive. And the pundits seem to think that will help our economy come back, and I tend to agree with that. If the war drags out for a long period of time, it may have an adverse effect on our economy, and our economy is very important right now because of our budget crunch. We need to start growing out of this economic slump that we're in. But we have deployed about 50% of our National Guard contingency. It's the largest deployment of our National Guard in Oklahoma history. A little over 5,000 National Guardsmen from Oklahoma are involved in some capacity, many of them in Kuwait and Iraq, fighting this war. And that obviously has an impact on our communities. It has an impact on our employers who can't replace them. I mean, they can bring in temporaries. And it you know, overall has an impact on our own homeland security. We are fully prepared to deal with any contingency, and I believe Oklahoma is as prepared, if not more prepared, than any state in the nation to deal with any kind of disaster that might come up. But obviously, we're shorter-handed than we were several months ago.
We see on the news protests around the country about the war, some violent, some not. We even see some news footage of people in Oklahoma protesting against the war. Where do you come down on when does the First Amendment protection to speak your mind when you're not in favor of something the government is doing, where does that cease, and where does an act that is considered not patriotic begin?
Boy, you know, you're asking questions that even the Supreme Court of the United States sometimes has a very difficult time deciding. You know, I'm probably going to leave those issues to the courts to decide. But one of the things that makes America great is that people can speak their mind. And you know, I support the right of anybody to stand up and speak their opinion or their position about this war or about any other issue. I don't necessarily agree with the protesters. I think it's more important that we support our president, we support our national leaders, and absolutely we support our troops, especially those that are abroad fighting in various venues around the world. That is important, and I think during this time of war, it's important that we unite and rally behind our troops and our national leaders. But I tell you what, I mean, that's what makes America great, the right to protest, and I will defend anyone's right to protest till the day I die.
Let me jump in here and get us to our first break. Governor Brad Henry, Kent Myers, Mick Cornett, you're watching The Verdict. Welcome back to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. We welcome in Governor Henry today, and Kent Myers has our next question.
We've heard a lot over and over on this show and elsewhere about the budget shortfall, the budget deficits that Oklahoma is facing. Just how bad is it?
Well, it's certainly the big issue of the session. It's the worst budget shortfall in our state history. Nearly $700 million less this year than we had at this time last year, and that causes, as you can imagine, all kinds of difficulties.
Well, I saw a statistic not long ago that indicated that the actual revenue shortfall was greater now than it was during the Penn Square Bank oil bust days of the early 80s.
That's right. Certainly as a percentage of our overall budget, it's much worse. In total dollars, it's much worse. It presents tremendous challenges for Oklahoma as we try to move this state forward, but it also presents, I believe, tremendous opportunities to restructure the way we do things in government in a manner that can produce long-term efficiencies as opposed to just kind of doing things the way that we've done them in the past.
You are not a Johnny-come-lately to the topic of lottery. You've been on this show before you ever announced your candidacy for governor, espousing that Oklahoma needed an education lottery, and that, of course, is probably more needed today than it was when we were doing our show a year or two ago about it. But are you still as convinced as you were then that Oklahoma needs an education lottery?
Oh, I'm more convinced today than I ever have been, and of course this severe budget shortfall, I believe, underscores even more the need for the education lottery. You know, there is really no feasible way that I can see in the near future to do something big for education short of the education lottery.
$300 million of new money, is that a realistic number? Is that your number? Is that somebody else's number? And is that obtainable?
You know, I mean, that's certainly an issue that people have discussed. I believe that if we do the education lottery right, that there's a real potential in a number of years down the road that we can be producing $300 million annually. Some argue with that. And that's, you know, that's constructive and I think valid criticism. But, you know, what I always say is whether it's 300 million or 100 million or 150 million, it's significant revenues annually for education, and it's very important that we do this. And you know, I'm asking the legislature to let the people vote, let the people decide.
Well, Oklahoma has a strong populist tradition of letting the people decide, and some 42 other times in our history.
Just in the last 10 years.
42 times in the last 10 years, the matters have been submitted to the people for decision. Do you believe the legislature is going to finally put the matter before the people?
Oh, I think so. You know, our most difficult hurdle was getting the bill initially out of the House of Representatives. That's where the most staunch opposition is. We finally, after a temporary setback, got it out of the House. I believe it'll be voted out of the Senate very shortly, and then we'll have to go back to the House for one last look and acceptance of Senate amendments. But I believe the legislature has seen the wisdom of letting the people decide this issue, and boy, they've heard from the people. The people of Oklahoma really want the right to vote on the education lottery.
Well, without regard to how they might vote yes or no on it, you have there is a poll out from one of our competitors, KFOR, I guess, that had some rather startling numbers. Do you recall?
Sure. Yeah. I believe that was a poll commissioned by Channel 4, conducted by USA Survey Group, that indicated that 92% of Oklahomans believe that they should have the right to vote on the education lottery, regardless of how they're going to vote on it. 92% believe that that Oklahomans ought to get to vote on it. Every public opinion survey that I've seen indicates overwhelmingly 80 to 95% of the people of Oklahoma want the right to vote on the education lottery, and some 75% believe that we should have an education lottery.
Is it going to be, if it's submitted to the people, what's your prediction? Is it going, not about how it's going to come out, is it going to be just a legislative change, or will it also require a change in the Oklahoma Constitution?
The program that I'm pushing and have pushed for a number of years in the legislature does both. We have, obviously, the details of the education lottery are about 45 pages long, and you don't want to put all that detail in the Constitution. That doesn't make sense. But I want to absolutely, unlike any other similar kind of issue in the past, absolutely guarantee that the revenues from the education lottery get to education. And the only way to guarantee that is to prohibit future legislatures from reducing general revenues to education as the lottery proceeds flow in. And we have to make that change constitutionally. We will constitutionally prohibit future legislatures from doing that, and will constitutionally prohibit legislatures from simply withholding new money from education.
Ken, about 1 minute left in this show.
Okay, one short question. I hope the answer is not as short. You're a deacon in the First Baptist Church of Shawnee.
Yes, proud of it.
And some Baptist churches have come out against the lottery. Does this cause you any personal discomfort?
You know, it really doesn't. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I'll stand up and fight for anybody to voice their opinion on any issue. There are probably, take my church for instance. I might get in trouble saying this, but I'd say the majority of members in my church, the vast majority, believe that the people ought to have a right to vote on this issue. Now, there's a small group that is just so adamantly opposed, generally based on moral grounds. I can't argue with that. If you have a moral objection, you ought to be against it. If you don't, it just makes sense. But, you know, I've talked to my pastor about it, and we've agreed to disagree on this issue, but he still loves me, and I love him, and we agree on so many other issues. This one issue is not going to cause me any kind of rift with my church.
Governor, thank you for coming on today, and I know you'll be back with us on our next show, and we appreciate that trip as well.
I look forward to it.
I know Governor and Kent will join me, and also in wishing our executive producer, Larry Blankenship,
Absolutely.
a quick recovery. Larry's feeling under the weather. Kent and I'll be back with a final word after this.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You in and out of it. Good.